that code has 6 mistakes in it. Are you able to find them? Well, if you are, I have great news for you. But if you are not, let me show you. My name is Andrew, and that code has 6 mistakes, and we're gonna fix it. So I specifically wrote it in Notepad, so you cannot see any highlighting, you cannot see any underline or other things that IDEs and text editors provide to us, but that code has 6 essential mistakes. So let's start. We have login method, which is a GVT string, and we also have a function user. It accepts user data and gets username and password from that user data. Then, if the username is admin and login method is GVT, and password is admin plus 123, we print logged in, or otherwise we print invalid credentials. And we just call that function user right here. So what are the problems with that code? The first problem is login method. So if we think about it, our function logs our user, so it authenticates our user. Login method is the thing that can change very frequently. So we can use GVTs or JSON Web Tokens, then we can use sessions, then we can use basic HTTP auth, we can use some other methods, we can use our fingerprints, we can use our anything. So login method will probably change. Like we can look at the variable name and how is it used. So if login method is GVT and we check for admin and for username and password, and it's probably gonna change. But aside from that, even if we don't look at the variable idea itself, we are using login method global variable inside of our user function. That is bad, and there are only a few exceptions when you can actually do that. So the few exceptions are when you have an object that is related to some other technology, so for example database, and you have an object that represents your database, so you want to use it in a function in the same file. Or if you connect to Redis, for example, and you want to use that Redis object inside of your function, so you don't need to create your Redis and connect to your Redis instance every time you call a function. So you just want to store your session, store your connection for your whole application lifetime. And that's perfectly fine, but typically those are a few exceptions, and you understand and realize when and how do you need to use them. But for the most variables, you don't need to use global variables inside of your functions. So how can we fix that? Well, we can just use it just like that. So instead of our global variable, I'm gonna add it inside of our user. If we use GVT as a default value or not, it depends on so if we want to use GVT as a default value or not, it depends on the application itself. So it depends on the logic and all that stuff. But for the simplicity's sake, I'm gonna leave GVT right here. But for now, let's just add login method as GVT here. Or let's actually just remove it. So let's have login method as a positional or named variable without any default value. So like that, and login method. Just like that. So we have our user data, which points to a dictionary, and login method, which points to a string. Now it's much better because we are using an argument or a parameter inside of our function. That's the first error. The second error has to do with user data. Never ever use mutable arguments as default values for your parameters in your functions. Why is that? Because whenever you have a mutable argument, so a changeable argument, so the object that you can change, those are dictionaries, lists, sets, those are the main ones. So dictionary, list, or set, or any object that can be changed. The problem is that different function calls share the same link to that object. So if we have different function calls, for example, function 1 and function 2, so we call function 1, then we call function 2. Both of those functions are going to share the same copy of user data object, or not the copy, but the same object. And if I'm going to change my user data in here, so user data from A equals 1, I change it the first time, and the second time I already have my A variable inside of it, and that can mess up our logic. So never ever use default arguments as or mutable arguments as your defaults. What you can do in that case is use none as user data, and then if you really need dictionary in your user data variable, is what you can do is user data equals user data or an empty dictionary. So what does it say? If user data is none, then we use default dictionary as the value. But if user data is an object, so it has something, we use user data. So it's basically the same, that thing is basically the same as saying if user data is not none, then user data equals, or sorry, if user data is none, then user data equals to a dictionary. So those are basically the same, but you can use that user data or an empty dictionary if you really need an empty dictionary as your value. So never ever use default arguments as your, or mutable arguments as your defaults. That's really important. Always use none, and then you can apply that pattern. You can use dictionary, a list, or put any value that you wish inside of here. But for our code, we need a dictionary. All right, so that is one problem. The next problem, the third one, is PEP8. So PEP8, Python Enchantments Proposals 8, is a style guide for you to follow. So whenever you write your Python code, you have different style guides. And style guide is basically the rules that you need to follow and how you should style your code. Those are not related to logic or how you code your applications, but those are related to the style itself. So in our case, I can see two things that we can fix. First of all, user data should be written like that, user_data. We only use camel case whenever we work with classes, and user data is just an object, so it's just a variable. So we need to use user data just like that. Let's call it user data here, let's call it user data here. And I think we are fine for now. All right, so user data is fine. We need to replace it with an underscore. I think it's called snake case. I'm not really sure, but never use camel case in your variables or in your functions. The same goes for user, just like that. Then we need to put two white spaces in here and two white spaces after the function. So that's perfectly fine. Now we have a PEP8 function. However, there is still one problem. The fourth one is the name of the function. Define user. So what is that? Define user. Well, the problem is that our function does not represent anything. It just says user. What is that? Which user is that? What does it do? If we look at the logic of our function, we can see that we log or authenticate our user. And what I can do here is use user_login. And that will be much better because right now we show the intention of the function. We use what that function does. Because each function is a code, and code can be represented as an action. So you do something. You get your data from your database. You, I don't know, add your entries to your list. You do something because you execute some code. And each function should have a verb inside of it. So almost every function should have a verb inside of it. So what does it mean? You should show intent of some sort. So, for example, you want to execute some action. In our case, it's a user login. We are saying that we need to login our user. So user login or login_user, doesn't matter in that case. So what you need to do in your function names is show some intent that you want to do something, you want to query something, you want to insert something, you want to update, save, delete, or do something. Kind of like that. So for example, not just quick sort, but execute quick sort or execute quick sort is the best name for the function. Kind of like that. So always show some intent in your function. That's really, really important. And aside from that, what we have here is user data. So user data is fine with the default value, but it's not fine with the data type because we're using a dictionary. First of all, why do we use it? We only have two values. So why do we use it? We only have two values, username and password. And second of all, dictionaries are really, really, really dangerous in that regard. So what we have here is user data as a dictionary, and we have username. And by the way, we need to use username just like that. Probably some of you already saw it. Yeah, so we need strings as keys. I worked with JavaScript too much. So why do we need to use a dictionary? We only have two values. And aside from that, dictionaries are really, really dangerous. Because as I said in one of my previous videos about data classes, they do not show a structure. So dictionaries are unstructured. You can have username in your dictionary. You can omit your username. You can have nothing in your username. You can have different data type of your username. So whenever you use dictionaries in order to transfer data between different functions or methods, you need to always think about the consequences that those dictionaries are implying in your code. Because right now I do not know if my username variable is inside of here. I do not know the type of that variable. I'm not sure about anything. So I don't know nothing about that variable username. And what's better in that case is use something like that. Username, password. And remove all of that code completely. And yeah, leave it as it is. So username and password. What we can do here is say username equals to some sort of username and password is some sort of a password. Of course, we need to put a comma and do it like that. So we have username, password, and login method. That is much better because right now we have username, we have password, and we are sure that whenever we call our function, we're going to have our username and our password. We can even add annotations in order to make sure that the programmers supply the right types to our function. So that is much cleaner, much better, and much more readable. Kind of like that. So those were 5 errors, I think. Yeah, probably 5. And the last error that I want to show you here that is really essential is if name equals main. I explained that a lot in my videos because I think that many beginners do not know what is if name equals main, but basically whenever you run your Python program, you maybe import different modules, and each module, each file has a name, and that name, and that's a variable, so a name variable, and it represents a unique name for that Python module. And whenever you run your file with Python, for example, main.py or Python, abc.py, so whenever you use Python on some sort of file, the file that you ran is going to have name variable as _main . So dunder main. And why is it important? Because if you just write your code just like that, so just like that, what's the problem with that? The problem is that if someone will import your code, so let's go to that variant again. If someone will import your code, that person will call user login implicitly. Because what are we saying here? We have user login function and we need to call it. But if you have something like that, what you're saying here is that we have user login function, and if you run my module directly, only then we need to use user login and login our user. So if name equals main basically implies that you're only executing that code if you want to run the module. Kind of like that, and that's always better. So always put if name equals main if you want to execute some sort of code in your module or in your file in general. So if you don't want to execute that code, you can just delete it, so kind of like that, and it will work perfectly fine. But if you want to execute it, always put it inside of if name equals main. Of course, if it's not related to the function itself, so if it's some sort of a decorator or some sort of dynamic thing, then of course you can put it inside of your main module. But make sure that all the logic that should be ran in case your file is ran directly is inside of if name equals main. Kind of like that. So all the other errors are non-essential. For example, password is admin pass, just like that. We need to put it in the environment variable. Username is admin, just like that. So environment variable as well. Then login method is GVT. Maybe we should check for that in some other place. But yeah, maybe we should return our logged in. Kind of like that. So return logged in. And here, if invalid credentials, we need to raise value error. So all those errors are not non-essential, and they all depend on the logic that we're writing, on the program that we're writing. But all the errors that I showed you before are essential, and you always should use if name equals main, follow pip8, never use mutable arguments as your default, and do all the stuff that I showed you in that video. So my name is Andrew, thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, leave a like, leave a comment, and bye bye.